Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. With me today is someone totally fascinating to me. His name is Paul Tukey. He is the Director of Environmental Stewardship at Glenstone Museum, and he is so much more. Paul, thank you so much for taking time to chat today.
Well, I'm truly honored to be on here with you. I've known you for a while now, and I've seen a lot of these, and you have an illustrious group of prior guests, and to be included means a lot to me.
Thank you so much.
Surely.
We have a lot to cover, and I usually do start at the beginning. You used to go to your grandparents in Maine on summers. You got your BA in journalism from the University of Maine, and early on, you were focused on green gardening and awareness of the environment. Why don't you talk briefly about that trajectory and how
Yeah.
that awareness began your whole sort of journey?
Well, you clearly done your homework or had a good memory of some of our conversations, but yeah, the childhood was spent in Bradford, Maine.
Yep.
We like to say you can't get there from here. That's what my grandmother would say. So if you look at the Maine map, you see Portland to the south and Bangor kind of north and toward the northern part, and you go about an hour northwest of Bangor, and you find the little town of Bradford. So in the 1960s, when I was a kid, I used to say I grew up in Bradford, but that growing up part is still a work in progress. In the 1960s, it was all dairy farms. And my grandfather was one of those. In fact, he was the best of those. He was the Dairyman of the Year for the state of Maine in 1970, and I'm very proud of that. I like to say that people in my family don't do just average things. We try to be the best that we can be, but we grew all the food for all the farm hands, all the friends, all the family in a little garden that was probably about 30 by 100. And my grandmother did most of that work, and she fertilized with cow manure.
Nice.
She didn't have Miracle Grow. She didn't have any of that stuff. And so I grew up with that and that whole waste not, want not mentality. We went to the town dump. Now they call them transfer stations today, but in those days it was the town dump, and it was at the end of the dirt road.
Before
And we
compost, before recycling, there must have been a lot of treasures there.
Oh, absolutely. My grandmother would go maybe once every 2 months because everything had a second and third and 10th use with my grandmother.
Sure.
But when we went to the dump, she'd go back with more stuff than she came with by far every single time. Drove my grandfather crazy.
That's
So,
pretty funny.
but you bring that ethos forward because we did feed a lot of people. I loved June, my favorite month, when the strawberries bloomed wild. These little tiny red berries about the size of a pea would pop up on the lawn in Maine, and I would forage those. And then the raspberry bushes, and that was life on the farm. I was up early helping to milk the cows, and I took an afternoon nap, and I went to bed early with my grandfather, and that was the way of life. And then you go fast forward that degree in journalism, and a funny story about my grandmother. When I went to her after my sophomore year and I transferred from the engineering department at the University of Maine to the journalism department, my grandmother was profoundly disappointed because she thought driving trains, because I majored in engineering, so she
Ah,
thought driving trains was going to be a great career.
hmm,
And she said she couldn't believe I was trying to be a writer instead.
fun.
So that journalism degree
So
worked.
let's talk about your journalism. So you worked for Gannett, you worked for HGTV, Home Garden TV. People, Places, and Plants was the name of your show. And I love that you were the American Horticultural Communicator of the Year from the American Horticultural Society. Yeah, talk about being a journalist.
Well, I knew I wanted to be a writer. My grandfather wanted me to be a farmer. I wanted to be a writer, and I would copy newspaper articles as if they were in my own words when I was 5, 6 years old and hand them to my mother as if I had written them. So
Hmm.
I was lucky. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I got into journalism and I became a stringer. I was covering University of Maine sports games for $25 a game, which was big money back in 1980. I was able to catch on to the Press Herald and Maine Sunday Telegram newspaper and became a sports reporter. And then they made me a sports editor. But the ripe old age of 29 they offered a buyout because they were closing the afternoon newspaper, and I declared myself to be a landscaping professional, which meant I bought myself a lawnmower and a pickup truck. And pretty much all I knew how to do was to walk in a straight line behind the lawnmower, kind of like Forrest Gump in the movie on the Red Snapper.
Okay.
And then people would say, "What are you going to do about my dandelions?" And I'd say, "Well, my grandmother will dig them up and eat them." And of course, that wasn't a terribly feasible idea since Graham lived about an hour away at that point, and I grew the company very, very quickly, hundreds of lawns, and I was buying weed and feed and Roundup and all the stuff you put on lawns to get rid of all those things that my grandmother considered to be a salad bar.
Yes.
You know, I'd forsaken all my grandmother's lessons.
Oh my God.
I wound up in the hospital with something called acute chemical sensitivity. And the doctor said, if you use all those lawn chemicals, you keep using all those lawn chemicals, you're going to be dead. So I got out of the landscaping industry and I went into journalism. I started a magazine called People, Places, and Plants. And then I had a television show called People, Places, and Plants with a guy named Roger Swain, the man in the red suspenders. He had hosted the Victory Garden for 18 years.
And you got Emmy nominations.
We did. We got Emmy nominations, and we had a great run, a lot of fun. But I quit in 2007. I left HGTV because I was the most hated man by their #1 advertiser, which was Scott's Miracle-Gro.
Of course.
And they advertised 2 out of every $3 in America in the gardening industry and advertising is from one company.
Wow.
And they hated my guts because I was trying to convince people not to use their products.
Sure.
I wanted people to garden like my grandmother had been gardening with cow manure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You did a ton of other stuff, but I want to get us closer to where you are now and what you're doing now.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that people know your background. So you get a call to come to Potomac to meet with Mitch Rails and to talk about Glenstone. And it was a 1-day sort of consultant site visit. Talk about that whole journey.
Well, so to be clear, I didn't have any idea who Mitch Rails was, and I certainly didn't get the call from Mitch Rails. I got the call from a woman who was one of the gardeners, and she said, "Would you come down to Potomac and show us how to do organic land care?" And I said, "I'm really, really busy. I don't take house calls." And she said, "Well, Glenstone's not your ordinary average house." And she said, "We have a small estate here with a small art museum, and we're trying to do some special things." And I said, "Well, okay."
All being 22 acres. That's small.
Well, it actually at the time was about 35. Quickly moved, it was 100, and it's grown since then, of course. But I did think it was going to be that 1-day visit. At the end of the day, they said, "Well, that was really interesting. We might need you for more than 1 day. Could you put you on a retainer for 1 day a month?" And then 1 day a month became a few days a week, and then every day of every week. And I literally lived down here as a consultant Monday through Friday. I would fly back to Maine on Friday afternoons, come back down on Sunday. And then in the spring of 2013, that's when Mr. Rails brought me into his office and we talked about a future at Glenstone. And I said, "Can't you move it to Maine? Can't you at least move it to New England?" And he said, "Well, I can do a lot of things, but I can't do that."
Right.
But really, at that time, even though I hated to leave Maine, where I lived my entire life,
and where your family was located, you were raising
and still is located. I've got a daughter and grandsons up there, but I saw Glenstone at that point in time as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a living classroom where all of these things that I've been traveling all over the United States and Canada, after the recession in 2007, I closed the magazine. I had already left HGTV. So what do I know how to do? I was running around the United States and Canada like crazy man, 180 days a year in an airport, living out of a suitcase, convincing people not to use Roundup and weed and feed. So coming to Glenstone allowed me the opportunity to practice all of this in one place.
So let's push the pause button for a second.
Sure.
Somebody has never heard of Glenstone. So talk about, where is it? What is it? Why is it awesome? And why should people hurry up and make a plan to go over and visit?
Absolutely. So Glenstone was founded in 2006 by Mitchell and Emily Rails. They both love art. They're both very accomplished art collectors, and it was their dream. So they opened it in 2006, fairly modest. I come along in 2010. By 2011, launched plans, just plans at this point, to expand it to where it's one of the largest modern art museums in the country now. It's open to the public Thursday through Sunday for free. It's really an extraordinary gift.
Mhm. If you haven't been, it's so beautiful. The land is beautiful. The art is beautiful. And we will post information as to how to make reservations and stuff at the end of this.
It's a unique mission statement because the mission is to seamlessly integrate art, architecture, and nature into a serene and contemplative environment. And it really is extraordinary. It is post-World War II art, whatever, that word modern confuses some people, but most of the art on display, not all of it, most of it's created since World War II, and is outdoor art, this indoor art, and of course, I think the greatest art of all is nature, right? And we have more than 300 acres now, more than half of which is open to the public. So we've got some extraordinary outdoor spaces.
Before we move on to the environmental aspect, tell me some of either your favorite piece or a couple of your favorite artists.
Oh my goodness.
And I know that's totally unfair, but
that is like, gosh, picking my favorite child. But I will say that indoors, I would go to room 4. Let me just tell you, it's room 4, and it's by Robert Gober, and it's incredible 360-degree immersive experience. It's kind of one of the world's largest paint by number exercises, where the artist went out and photographed a forest and then recreated it, hand painted on walls, and it's really amazing. And then outdoors, I have to go with, I'm going to just call it the boardwalk area, and it's a whole area where there's a pond, there's a restored stream. So March the 5th of 2014, Mitch Rails asks a fairly profound question of those of us in the room. How are we going to convert an eyesore into an asset? And he was referring to the fact that Glenstone has 4.5 miles of streams and tributaries that flow in and around it. And all of these, like most streams in this area, are degraded. So they're eroding, trees are falling down, invasive vines are everywhere. And it was a safety issue. It was certainly a visual issue. It's a functional issue and aesthetic issue, all the above. What are you going to do? And I ended up taking on that project. So for 7.5 years, my job was to restore those streams and tributaries. So when you go to that boardwalk area, that boardwalk takes you over the stream and into some wetland areas and out to some art exhibits. And one of the things that Glenstone, art, architecture, and nature, where does the art begin and end? Where does nature begin and end? Where does architecture begin and end? Really, the boardwalk itself is all three. It's really all three, because you can't separate the boardwalk from the wetlands or the ponds or the stream. And so I love that area of campus, and I encourage everybody. It takes a little bit of walking, but we now have the means to get you down there. So if you can't walk, aren't able to walk, we have electric carts and we can get you down there so you can experience it.
super. I actually am going to announce right here that the President of the Senate just named me as the senator to serve on the Maryland State Arts Council. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I served during my 8 years as a member of the House, but this is returning now as a senator many years later. So let's pivot, though, from the art to the environment. Because you are now, your title, I believe your current title is the Director of Environmental Stewardship. Yes. And Glenstone has done extraordinary things towards carbon zero. And why don't you just name, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of the things you're proudest of, because there's so many of those to choose from too.
Yeah, well, thank you, Cheryl, for that. It really, of course, started with the organic approach, the natural approach to landscaping, which means we don't use any synthetic chemical fertilizers, no synthetic chemical weed killers, no insect killers. We want to exist with nature. So you come to Glenstone and you see an organic lawn, you see 15 or 16,000 newly planted trees, all done organically and all native to this region. So what we did is we went into the forest and we saw what Mother Nature had planted, and Mother Nature was growing successfully. and we simply pulled those plants out into the Maine landscape. We have 45 acres of native meadow. I've already mentioned the stream restoration. So one of the amazing things that we did at Glenstone is we set aside some money in the year 2015, and we counted all of the fish in the streams and all of the aquatic insects, all the creepy crawly things that live there, and they're an important part of the ecosystem. We went through and counted all that with the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Maryland, said because we need a baseline.
Yes.
And now every single year, DNR, Department of Natural Resources, comes in 4 times a year, and they count the fish again, and they count the aquatic insects. And we now know that we have more fish and more insects than we did, kind of a build it and they will come. If you restore the waterways, which is a controversial thing to do in the state of Maryland and anywhere, a lot of people believe that the condition of the rivers and the streams is Mother Nature's will. My answer to that is Mother Nature never planned on roads. Mother Nature never planned on culverts and roofs and all of this paving, everything. And so we created a problem, mankind, and it's our job to fix it.
Women are responsible too.
Humankind. Sorry, Cheryl. Humankind. So we created the problem, and so we can fix the problem. And then we take a really holistic approach to sustainability and regeneration. One of the things, people have to come to Glenstone, again, open for free. You can come as your students come for free. But one of the things we're most proud of is if you come on the ride-on bus that originates in Rockville, you come in for free. You don't need a reservation. Now, Glenstone is free. You do have to have a reservation before you get there. But if you're a student, you're a member of the armed forces, you're a teacher, there's some classes of folks that we welcome in. But the guaranteed way that I'm most proud of is that ride-on bus. Because driving to Glenstone, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's not near any metropolitan areas. And so we want you to come on the bus. And I'm super proud that we were able to do that. It may be, my boss, Tony Cervini, considers that to be one of my greatest legacies.
Right.
Because when we started talking about having a bus come to Glenstone back in 2012, 11 years ago, people looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, that's never going to happen.
Right.
But ultimately, it did happen because Tobytown, and this comes back to politics a little bit and working together to create common goals and common benefits. So Tobytown had been lobbying for a bus.
Which is where?
So Tobytown is about, as the crow flies, about a mile from Glenstone off River Road, heading west. So if you're heading out toward Germantown in that area, Poolsville, so if you go to Potomac Village and just keep going out on River Road, it's a historic African-American community. They've been wanting a bus to come there for decades. And we were able to talk to those folks and say, you know what, we want a bus, you want a bus. Maybe we can merge those 2 needs. And so again, super proud that we were able to make that happen.
Amazing. So let's pivot. As much as I really want to talk about Glenstone, let's pivot because you were an integral, extraordinary change agent in terms of helping shine the light on the historic African-American community of Scotland. So I grew up near Scotland, but why don't you describe its history and then some of what has befallen it in recent years?
Well, so Scotland, it confuses people because we just did the Juneteenth Scotland Heritage Festival, and everybody thinks that we ran not everybody, but a lot of people who don't know think we ran some kind of Scottish festival on Juneteenth. And my mother up in Maine was just terrible.
No kilts. There were no kilts anywhere around this.
No kilts.
No bagpipes.
And I'm not sure how many Scottish people came either. They would certainly be welcome.
Right.
But what happened was that post-Civil War, there were about 40 African-American enclaves that emerged post-Civil War just in Montgomery County. One of them being a community called Snake's Den, which existed on what was then a dirt road, 7 Locks Road, in Potomac. And it was land that was, quite frankly, undesirable by those standards because there wasn't a lot of flat land for farming. So it wasn't considered desirable. So the very first settler, well, in 1880, who owned the land, there were settlers before that, but black settlers, that is. But the first person to own land was a man named William Dove in 1880. He bought 36 acres at an auction for $210. So about quick math, about $8 an acre.
Hmm.
His relatives and other Black families started moving in and congregating along Seven Locks Road. So by the end of it, by the peak of the land ownership of the Black community, that community stretched all the way from what is now Democracy Boulevard, almost all the way to Montrose Boulevard. So you're talking about 2.5 miles, approximately $500 million in real estate in today's value. Now, in 1920, as local legend has it, or local lore has it, some folks in the community didn't like the name Snake's Den, and they wanted a new name. A sign was brought home for new residential development. It was a sign that had fallen down, and they brought it back to Scotland. It was called, the sign said New Scotland.
Hmm.
And they took some whitewash paint and painted away the new, and they erected the Scotland sign at the entrance to the community. And thereafter, it was referred to as Scotland, although the Washington Post referred to it as Snake's Den as recently as 1938.
Hmm.
So Scotland's there, but what happens in the 1950s and into the 60s and 70s is that land becomes more and more and more valuable for white settlers to come in and grab that land. And the original settlers of Scotland, in some cases, they sold the land for pennies on the dollar for what it was worth. Some of these folks were not highly educated. Some of them couldn't read or write. You look at the old contracts and there's just a little X mark there.
Hmm.
So by 1965, what was once hundreds and hundreds of acres along Seven Locks Road had been reduced to 46 acres. So the land that the most visible area is the Cabin John Village Shopping Center, the Cabin John Regional Park. A lot of that land came from the families of Scotland. And that land was sold and gone by the mid-1960s. And there was a whole action taking place at the county government. They wanted Scotland gone because none of the houses there met building code, because the county had not run essential services. There was electricity in some of the homes, but there was no water and no sewer run to the community because the county said there's no tax base.
Right.
We can't economically justify bringing water into the community, bringing simple things like having toilets. So it was all outhouses as recently as 1965.
We need to fast forward a little bit. So when the county was paving and upgrading Seven Locks Road, they did it in a pretty irresponsible way for the Scotland community. Why don't you speak about that and the impact, especially as we're experiencing our climate crisis, the impact of all of that?
Right. So the original Seven Locks Road was a dirt road that ran north to south, and the little dirt road ran behind the church. So the church was still connected to the residents of the community. It was the hub of the community that opened in 1924. 1960,
About 100 years ago now.
Yeah, they want to develop a shopping center, and so they want to straighten and widen and pave the road. So they literally put the paved road on the downhill side of the church, and that road functioned as a dam and has functioned as a dam for the last 63 years. So every single time it has rained for the last 63 years, light rain, a sub pump deals with it. Heavy rain, the water takes on basement. Really heavy rain is a flood. July the 7th of 2019, the flood of all floods. In fact, Glenstone flooded that night. A lot of Potomac flooded July 7th, 2019. The entire basement fills up to the first floor rafters in a basement wall that was built by hand by the original descendants of William Dove. That wall collapses. The church is no longer usable. Literally nothing happens for about 8 months. April of 2020, NBC4, one of the local channels, airs a news segment. It catches the attention of the Rails family, catches the attention of Glenstone thereafter, and we all decided to become part of the solution at the direction of our founders. And we had just done a massive expansion, as you know. So we opened our big expansion at Glenstone we expanded from 100 acres to more than 300 acres, 2018. So we have all this expertise, and we say, you know what, we're going to help these folks. And the job is twofold, really. We need to raise the money. It's actually threefold. We need to raise the money. We need to build and repair and ultimately expand the church. But we need to tell the story, like I'm telling you right now.
Yes.
Why is that little white church by the side of the road? Why is it even there? Most people don't even know why it was there. And we'd like to think that what we just accomplished this past June, I will say June 16th to the 23rd, we've changed that public perception a little bit. Maybe people understand a little bit more about why that church is there, why that community was actually there first.
So I was thinking about the Juneteenth related activities. And I was thinking about it as education, outreach, fun, and then fundraising opportunities to help rebuild.
Right.
Why don't you talk about what some of the highlights were, and what was a disappointment, if anything, and what your hopes are for the future?
Oh my goodness.
It's a lot.
Yeah, the highlights was really bringing people together. I met with the Jewish Federation this morning, a woman named Gia Siegel, you probably know her. And she said, when I went there that day, I thought it was going to be nice. She said, I didn't know it was going to be extraordinary.
Oh, how wonderful.
Another gentleman, Larry Shulman, whose name is on the side, he's a significant lawyer. He calls it the Scotland miracle. He says, what everybody pulled together from all walks of life, working with the faith community, and most importantly, frankly, the Scotland community and members of the other 40 historic churches, we've created what we think is a movement, not just a day, but a movement to say, you know what, these historic communities that got a raw deal, it's not too late. It may be too late in some cases to save structures or save cemeteries, but it's not too late to do the right thing. So there's a restorative justice element to all this.
100%.
Are we responsible in our generation for the mistakes of our elders? We can have that conversation, but we feel good about it, and there's nothing bad coming out of this. It's acknowledging history. Some of it is less than pleasant history.
Right.
It happened. We can't change it, but we can talk about it. We can do something about it. So, successful events. We had so much music. We had joy on children's faces. We had a wonderful children's carnival put on by Letitia Gassaway Paul and her sisters and her family. So the Scotland community itself, I can't stress enough. They were out there.
Yeah.
They were out there. I'll tell you an inside story. We bought 288 volunteer t-shirts, thinking that's got to be enough. It's got to be enough. We could have used 200 more.
Amazing.
And so many people came out to help from, again, all walks of life. That's the real success story. And then the conversations we're having now is how do we build on that?
Yes.
And we started.
Before we go on, you've mentioned some people. So Mitch and Emily Rails, you mentioned Larry Shulman, but Larry and Bobby Shulman hosted an event, I know, council member Andrew Friedson. I mean, there were some really early big supporters who helped raise the visibility and stuff, but who are you going to add to that list? And just...
Well, again, so the descendants of William Dove, and I mentioned Letitia Gassaway Paul. So Letitia is a 5th generation descendant of William Dove. It was her grandfather who was very instrumental in saving Scotland in the first place in the 1960s with the help of a woman named Joyce Siegel. Joyce just celebrated her 90th birthday. She's still very much alive in Rockville.
Amazing.
She is a truly amazing person.
A trailblazer, the Housing Opportunities Commission, affordable housing.
Yeah,
has been an icon.
She'd be a great, if you haven't kibitzed with her yet, you got to get her on the list because she's awesome.
That's good.
And so Letitia, she is, I call her the modern matriarch. She's not an old woman by any means. She's much younger than myself, but she is a real visionary, and she just wants to do the right thing by her family. But she also recognizes that this isn't just about Scotland. And so when we started the foundation, the Juneteenth Scotland Foundation, a nonprofit, it was to support and celebrate all the historic Black communities in Montgomery County. So next year's Juneteenth celebration will have other benefactors. This year it was the Scotland Church, because we need to expand it, we need to repair it. We've got some real work to do. But next year and subsequent years, and we hope they'll be doing this festival 50 and 100 years from now, but it will benefit these other communities because they all have needs. And it will continue to bring people together through interfaith and social action. We had 52 places of worship sign on with us. That's
Interfaith,
a
interfaith. And
52.
just to be clear, this year, 2023, was the very first year that Juneteenth was a recognized state holiday. And I think the second year that it was a federal holiday, that President Biden did an executive order on that. We passed a law in Maryland.
Right.
So long way to go, but we are not going to cover any more than that. We're going to pivot one other place first before we head to our Fast Five, because we are running out of time. You wrote a book with Joanna Lohman, Raising Tomorrow's Champions, about soccer. So as we are dealing with the World Cup, watching the World Cup, women's soccer, pay equity, talk briefly, please, about women's soccer and soccer as a way of developing women leaders.
Well, so Joanna Lohman is one of the two women who have played on the national team historically from Montgomery County. She grew up in Silver Spring, played for Bethesda. You know, by 2001, I believe she made her debut on the national team, and she was hanging around the team for the next decade. Incredibly well respected. I've got a daughter playing at the Potomac Soccer Club at the time. This is going back 3 or 4 years now. Joanna just retires, gets her uniform retired by the Washington Spirit. Nobody's ever going to wear number 15 again. I take her out to lunch and I say, I got this idea to write a book called Raising Tomorrow's Champions about life and parenting lessons from the women and the families who raised, who played on the national team. And so how do we spend the pandemic? And I went to work at Glenstone every day like this by Zoom.
Sure.
But at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock at night until midnight, a lot of nights, Joanna and I are writing this book, interviewing Mia Hamm, interviewing Abby Wambach, interviewing Michelle Akers, and all these people going back to 1985 who played for the national team. It's still only in history 250 women who have ever worn the crest. And we talked to about 150 of those folks. Women's soccer, I believe, in sports, it's not just women, but sports in general, I believe, is one of the great classrooms. And soccer is the great game around the world that all you need is a ball and some open space, and you don't even need that much open space, and you've got a game. And so it is wonderful. And what I love is that you are seeing, even now reflected on the national team, the diversity of the broader population. For a while there, it was getting a bad rap. It's just rich, blonde, white girls, frankly.
Right.
But when you look at the national team today, it's really, truly reflective of the whole society.
Right. All right, Paul, it is time for Fast Five, because I know we could keep talking for another hour.
Okay.
5 quick questions, 5 super quick answers.
Okay.
Folks know a little bit more about you. But the first one, I am going to ask you, what is your best tip you can give to a home gardener?
Understand that Mother Nature knows how to grow things already. And as a gardener, all you're really trying to do is emulate Mother Nature. So that means use natural stuff and you'll get good results.
Okay.
If you don't think organic gardening works, it means you just don't know how to do it. So give me an email and I'll help you out. Okay.
Question number 2. What's a movie you have seen multiple times? Never gets old.
Oh, gosh. When Harry Met Sally, my favorite movie of all time, by far.
Okay. Question 3. What makes you laugh?
I laugh at so many things. My best friends who can, I have a friend named Dave, and just hearing his voice makes me laugh. If I haven't talked to you for a while, Cheryl, I'm going to be laughing in the first 30 seconds because that's what I take. I have a motto: if it's not fun, I'm not going to do it. And you got to find a way to make life fun.
Amazing. When you're talking about climate and racism and stuff, that's remarkable.
You have to find that's humor is the common ground. Humor and music.
Love it. Question 4. What's your what's your secret pleasure, your junk food that's your go-to? It's probably not so much of a secret after the opening night gala of Juneteenth. It's dancing. Oh, that's not a junk food though.
There's some video out there. Oh my, I thought junk food was a metaphor.
Nope.
Junk food is Humpty Dumpty barbecue potato chips from Canada, but they're from Maine. Humpty Dumpty barbecue potato chips, you can't buy them in Maryland. Sorry.
Okay, huh? Well, obey is okay. And question 5, the question that I ask everybody. Paul Tukey, Director of Environmental Stewardship at Glenstone, and so much more. What is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Yeah, again, I'll go back to my last answer, which and my wife would beg to differ, but I would say dancing.
Dancing.
I can't dance better than anybody, but I can have more fun doing it.
I love that. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you for taking the time. Thank you, more importantly, for all that you do, for all that you have done, and all that you do to educate and inspire folks to be better people and to be better stewards of our planet and our society.
Well, right back at you. You're such a wonderful resource for me personally and for the state of Maryland yourself. So thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you again before too long.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.